Hello, welcome to the Rezzed session stage here at EGX Rezzed 2019. Thank you so much for coming. I'm John T from Rezzed. I'm just here to do the intro. So our next speaker is returning hero Dave Gilbert. This is his third and hopefully final appearance on the stage this year. And he is here to talk all about...
Come back if you want me to.
Yeah. Right, so we've got a bit of time this afternoon. Come back and just do a bit of freestyle. Yeah, let's just ad-libbing. But Dave is here to talk about the curse of omniscience and knowing too much about game development. So if you could please give him a very warm welcome.
Thank you very much. Originally, I had called this talk Instinct versus Experience, and Graham said, no, that's not a cool enough title, and offered this one. And I'm like, I like this one better. So it is now called When Knowing Too Much is a Problem. So hi, this is pretty cool. It was my first time at Rezzed. I've heard about it every year. I'm always asked if I'm coming. Never did. I'm here. And what's cool is that I'm usually given 30 minutes for a talk. And this time I'm given 45, which feels like an incredible luxury. So I'm going to talk slow for once. This is nice. I will try to talk slow. Quick disclaimer, I'm basing a lot of this talk on my own personal experiences and the feedback I've gotten from my own work and the work I publish. So as with everything, your mileage may vary. There are exceptions to every rule. But be warned, since I am going to be talking about my own experiences, I'm going to be talking about myself a lot. So, be prepared for that. So speaking of myself, who am I? I am a native New Yorker. I'm a former 9-to-5 guy, had a boring job in the garment district, dealing with manufacturing, kind of escaped that by making games, and eventually started doing that full-time in 2006. Started making niche, obscure point-and-click adventure games, and we've been doing that since 2006. Joined by my wife Janet in 2009, my daughter Eve in 2013, and we launched 16 games, including the Blackwell series, Shiva, Puzzlebots, Resonance, Technobabylon, Gemini Rue, Primordia, New Guys, Shardlight, and I'm sure I'm forgetting some of them, but they're all up there. And we launched, our latest one is called Unavowed, which we released last year. And this took me 3 years to make. It had kind of been percolating in my head for several years before that. It was actually inspired by the words of a former BioWare writer, named Jennifer Hepler. This is a bit paraphrased. She made the point that in a lot of games, you can skip the cutscenes and the narrative sections to get back into the juicy combat. But what she wanted was the opposite. She wanted to skip the combat and get to the narrative stuff. The stuff like the fighting, the tactics, the min-maxing of gear, that just got in the way. It was a slog and took up too much time and wasn't enjoyable for her, and a lot of people agree with this. Sadly, she got a lot of undeserved flack for expressing this view. I won't get into all that. But her words always stuck with me because I really, really agreed with them. Jen worked on Dragon Age Origins, and like Jen herself, this was a big inspiration for me. The fun of the game for me was always the narrative aspects, the branching dialogue, the choices and consequences, choosing which companion character to bone. These things where they had to get that in there. These were the heart and soul of the experience. And like Jen, this is the game I really wanted to play. So my thoughts have always been, why not make a game where that is the game, the primary focus? This sounded like the game of my dreams to me. This is a game I really wanted to play, didn't exist. And I kept waiting for that game to be made, and no one made it. And so in a fit of hubris, I decided that I was going to make that game. But I kept putting it off because it was a very ambitious and daunting prospect. Then a few years later, I met Jen Hepler at the Game Developer Conference in San Francisco. We started talking, and it turned out we knew each other. We were old friends. We went to the same summer camp when we were 13 years old. we hung out at each other's houses with mutual friends, and I had been following her career for years, and I didn't recognize her. It had been 25 years, and she changed her name when she got married, but it was this really bizarre, serendipitous thing. And so if I was looking for this heavenly sign that it was time to make this game, this was it. It was time to make this game of my dreams. And I was in a very good position to do this. I had spent, at that point, about a decade making these games. We had done 15 of them at that time. I built a pretty good knowledge of foundation and experience, pretty good foundation of knowledge and experience. And there was never going to be a better time to make this game. And I already had my title, and I had my setting. I knew it was going to be a dark urban fantasy set in New York, inspired by stuff like the Dresden Files, huge fan of the Dresden Files, World of Darkness, and Hellblazer, all these things I really loved. So I was super psyched to make this game. So I sat down and was all set, and I started. I was really psyched to make this game. So thus began the worst battle with writer's block that I've pretty much ever fought in my life up to that point. I had never been so stuck. There was progress, but it was agonizingly slow. And it really did a number on my self-esteem for a while. At first, I thought this was only due to the scope of the project. Like the BioWare games I was inspired by, you have access to 5 different companion characters that later was cut down to 4, of which you can choose 2 of them. But rather than give you different tactics and combat situations, they would give you different solutions to solving problems in the game world. For example, Logan here can talk to ghosts, and the ghosts would often give you background details, which could, for example, be used to gain favor with an NPC or help solve a puzzle. Or Eli here can set stuff on fire. So, woo, yay. So designing for all these different scenarios took time, and by design, the game could not be short. Otherwise, the player couldn't take full advantage of this mechanic of choosing different characters and different combinations and so. So this alone made it a much more challenging project to work on, but my problem went a little bit deeper than this. It was like 2 different parts of me were fighting each other, and I always potentially call this by my original title for this talk, the battle between my instincts and my experience. Finally getting to the point. Are you moving? There we go. Instincts, of course, are the gut feelings, something feels right or wrong. But you can't really describe how or why you feel that way. You just know. It's instinct. You just go with it. You don't question it. Experience, of course, is the knowledge that you gain by doing stuff a lot. You do a thing, it works, it doesn't, you get feedback, you do better. It's the skills, the theories, the learned behavior, the leveling up, as it were. In ideal situations, these 2 things work like this, just hand in hand, working together. Instinct will tell you that something is or isn't working, and your experience will enable you to figure out how might have fixed it or make it better. Instinct can tell you that something is awesome. You just feel it. This is good. And you can fall back on your experience to help you make that thing and make it even better. But for me, often, it more resembles this. Like there was a bare-knuckle drag-out fight going on inside my creative process. And with every bit of design I'd put on paper, I'd come out the other side feeling like I ran a marathon. This is all very esoteric, I know. The 2 things often merge, and it's a weird analogy, but this is how I often visualized it in my head. And from the very beginning of production on this game, I knew that I wanted to focus more on the immersion and exploration aspect of things. I wanted the act of discovery to be rewarding. In most of my previous work, you discovered stuff merely by someone telling you about it, and I wanted to take some steps towards changing that. Here's one of my early pieces of placeholder art. This is from the first mission of the game, after you've been recruited into this secret organization called the Unavowed. I know it's very obvious when you look at it what it is. You and your 2 companion characters are looking into this strange cult operating in the East Village. This room is the basement of an abandoned building. And I knew you'd encounter a sacrificial altar, a dead body on the floor, and a ghost hovering over the body. And as I was working on this image, my instinct took over. I thought it was a bit boring, and I wanted to make it more visually interesting. And just out of nowhere, I thought, hey, why not make the basement half forest? Result of some magic that's being performed there. This thought came out of nowhere, pure instinct, and I just went with it. So I used all my art ability, and I added a forest. I could only get away with making art look like this. Things would be so much easier. But anyway, here's the final image. And I think this is pretty cool. My instincts were pretty on point in this instance. And when all the elements are in the game, my experience kind of reared up and told me that, nah, actually, I think this is wrong. There's just too much going on here. I'm asking the player, asking the player to process 3 major things at the same time. 1, the basement is half forest. 2, there is a dead body on the floor, and holy crap, there's a freaking ghost in the room. And since this is a 2D game with just one view and one solid static screen, I can't really direct the player's point of view as I would in a 3D game. It's all up on the screen at the same time. You're not actually discovering any of this. It's all just being thrown up in your face. And I knew this would be very overwhelming to players just coming into the room for the first time. And I knew this because I had experienced this very thing in previous games that I had made. So my experience taught me that this would happen, and I knew I had to fix it. So my instincts wanted this awesome room, but my experience was like the strict school teacher telling me, no, it's not going to work. And this was agonizing. I had to get these 2 sides to work together. So I took a few steps back, and I tried to remember what my goals here were. I wanted the players to feel rewarded for discovering something themselves, and that just wasn't happening. It was all being discovered for you. So I needed to slow things down and enable the player to discover and process the stuff in their own time. Speaking of slowing things down, just a minute. First up was this dead body. That was pretty easy to fix. I just threw a blanket over it. It stands out, but not immediately, so the player has to explore the scene a bit with their eyes, and they see the blanket, they click on it, oh no, dead body. So that was the easy one. The ghost was slightly trickier. The issue wasn't that there was a ghost in the room, and that was overwhelming. Rather, the problem was that this is the first time in the game that you encounter a ghost. So you learn about ghosts and how they work right after discovering this weird forest basement. This is a lot of new information piled up on top of new information, which is just overwhelming. So the fix for this was to introduce the ghost in another room of this building. You're free of most distractions here, so you can absorb this new information pretty easily. So when you go into the basement and see the ghost, it's something you've already digested, so you're not choking on it. I also wanted the player to discover the forest. I wanted it to be this surprise. So I wanted it to be a surprise for both the characters and the player at the same time. Originally, they walk into the room and they react, but the player had already been seeing this forest for 5-10 seconds already, so you had already processed it. I wanted the player to discover this forest along with the characters. So I turned the lights off, and you have to use Eli's fire magic to reveal a fuse box, which you can fix, and then you discover the forest that way at the same time as the characters. So here, after several weeks of tearing my hair out, I managed to get both sides working together, hand in hand, and the results were good. I was very happy with how this turned out. But sometimes it's a lot harder and takes a lot longer. Come on. I mentioned earlier how I wanted to focus on immersion in this game. I wanted you to feel like you were exploring a place instead of just a background on a screen. In most of my previous games, you navigated the world by clicking on items on a map screen. So I decided early on, no map screens, with one obvious exception. Unavowed takes place in New York, and you go to all 5 boroughs, so you have to click on the subway map to get to a borough. But once you get there you explore. You get to point A to point B with no interruptions or any fancy transitions. And this made things very difficult for me. One thing my experience has taught me over the years is to keep things efficient and tight. I don't like padding. And here I was deliberately making the player do more. So to negate this, I had to spend a lot of time designing each area to be as walk-friendly as possible. Here's a quick sketch of the Staten Island Map, one of the hub areas in the game. Each square represents one background and one room to walk through, and I kept it pretty tight. I'm quite happy with how that turned out, especially this area. 3 locations can be accessed from one background, and I was very proud of this. It's a very efficient, tight map. I made sure there was something very relevant on each and every screen, no padding at all. Everything was going great until I started putting together the characters and dialogue and stuff for this location here. This is the police station exterior. Here you need to speak to a police captain named Joy Harrison. I wanted to save on a background, so I put her outside. But for some reason, when I sat down to write her dialogue, I just could not get there. I just couldn't get into her head. Something felt wrong. It was that instinct rearing its ugly head again, and I couldn't continue until I figured out why. Something was stopping me from writing her dialogue. I would try, and I just couldn't get there. I would avoid it, put it off, work on other stuff. For some reason, my instincts just wouldn't let me work on her. And it took ages of trying before I kind of realized what the problem was. I couldn't get into her head because I didn't know why she was standing outside that police station. My experience taught me that it was better to have her outside, be efficient, don't waste the player's time. And this ticked all the right boxes on my list of the right things to do. But now my instincts were telling me this was bad, something was wrong. So the obvious thing to do would be to add another room, enable the player to go into the police station, and you can talk to her there. But I resisted this with every fiber of my body, because if I did that, then I'd be left with this completely pointless background. It would just be hanging out there on the map, just flabby and useless, just a buffer between one room and the next, not interesting at all. And this went against everything I had learned about good design. So this is my experience saying, no, you can't do that. Back in the map screen days, this wouldn't have been a problem. Just click on the icon of the police station and bam, you're there. But now I had to kind of fight this new paradigm that I foisted on myself. And I agonized over this. This seems like such a minor thing. And I kept trying to think of justifications to keep her outside. Maybe she's on a smoke break. Maybe she's drinking coffee. Maybe she's on her phone. But I rejected all of them because none of them helped me get into her head. And I eventually settled on her waiting for the bus, so I went so far as to get that bus station, to get the art made for that. That didn't work either. And then I just realized I realized the real problem was that having her on the street removed all of her authority. She's a captain, she's in a position of authority, and needs to be in a place that reflects that. And there was no way around it. I bit the goddamn bullet. Added this other location, and put her inside. And it worked. Envisioning her at a desk, surrounded by mountains of paperwork, kind of stressed out from all her work, that enabled me to kind of get a handle on who she was and get into her head, and bam, the dialogue, the scene, everything was written in a day. So instinct won over experience in this case. But I still had this empty friggin' background, and it bothered me like crazy. I just couldn't let this go. So I created another character, and put him here just to make it a bit more interesting and not totally pointless. And ironically enough, this character, whose name is Donnie, he ended up being one of my favorite characters in the game. So, you know, maybe it was all meant to be, maybe, but it all ended up reasonably okay. So these two scenes, the basement and the police station, just two examples out of many. And while telling you about them only took a little while, it's a slow, painful process to actually live through. So sometimes I just have to ask myself, how do I avoid getting in this situation in the first place? I can't make a game this way. This takes too long. I'm driving myself crazy. How do I avoid this type of situation? Back in the old days, say 5 to 10 years ago, I probably wouldn't have gone through all of this stuff. I would have, excuse me again. I probably would have just forged ahead, just let it be. Back then, it was a very liberating feeling, just going, letting it flow, not thinking, just running wherever my instincts took me. Things were very fast and loose and fun back then. I felt like I was so much more productive. But now I got that pesky experience getting in the way, and I waste several weeks or months at a time just banging my head against those brick walls, trying to make this work. So back to this again. Sometimes I never get there at all, and I can't get past my own head. Either my instincts or my experience is telling me that my work sucks, and I just can't push past it. And this is a horrible feeling. It can paralyze you if you let it. It just saps my confidence, and it's really hard to get my mojo back when I'm in that zone, when I'm in that bad place. So eventually, I just decided the best way I could go about this is to try to avoid getting there in the first place. And it doesn't always work, but I usually do it with prototyping. Back to the red line backgrounds. This is from an early build of Unavowed. I built this quick, cheap line art, stick figure characters, placeholder dialogue, just whatever it took to get the game up and running and playable. Just running on instinct as much as I could, trying not to let my own neuroses get in the way of what I'm doing. Getting the game out of my brain onto the screen as soon as possible. And this often let me see the potential problems early, and often let me see the potential fun of a scene or a section or mission. And most importantly, I can also put it in front of testers. The main advantage of that is the most obvious one. You get feedback early in the process. If something is really wrong, or the testers are not having fun, or they're just really disgusted by something in the game and not in a good way, then you can dive in and fix it without having wasted a lot of time, money, or assets. And by the same token, if they really like your game, and you can generate that, you can reach them on an emotional level and generate that positive response when the game looks like this, then you can be pretty sure that you're onto something. I know that when I reach that point, I can move forward with a lot more confidence. And sometimes that confidence, that jolt to the ego, is all I need to keep me motivated. If the game can be fun at this point, then I can be pretty sure that that'll be even better with the final artwork and assets and music and everything else. In this section of the game, we're on Staten Island again. This is one of the first missions I designed, so I kind of made all my mistakes and hashed out my design here. But in this section, you and your two party members are investigating some mysterious goings-on. I'm not going to spoil it. So I thought I had it all clear in my head. You're here to solve this mystery. So again, I threw a bunch of placeholder art together, cobbled together a playable build in a few weeks, and I hated it. I just didn't like it. It was boring, and something, again, just wasn't gelling. Sometimes my instincts or experience yell at me, and I don't know what the problem is. I just can't figure it out. So in that case, because I had a prototype handy, I rallied at the testers and asked for their opinion. And their responses matched mine. They thought it was kind of boring. It was hard to really care about anything. Again, it's hard to connect to something when the game looks like this, but again, I really wanted to connect with the game looking like this, because that would give me the confidence to move forward. This section did everything that it was technically supposed to do, but it was obvious that there was something wrong at the very core of it. It was very flawed, somehow. So I had to reevaluate what the core of this was. Why exactly is the player on Staten Island? And not just the gameplay reason, but why do I, the developer, want you here on Staten Island? And when I really started thinking about it, the answer was obvious. You're here to meet this lady. Her name is Vicky Santina, this disgraced police officer you encounter and recruit into this secret organization. So the real goal, the high-level design goal, was to make the player like Vicky. I wanted you to think she's cool. I wanted you to see what she can do. I want you to like her and take her out on missions. And so I reevaluated how I did everything. I gave her more screen time. Now she's in the alley attacking your group, and you have to come to a mutual understanding. Here you are fighting an epic battle. Come on. Epic battle with a sea monster. What? I made sure every moment of the mission, every character you meet, every puzzle you solve, reinforced who Vicky was. That police officer on the bench, I made him, he's Vicky's brother, and so he has experience with her and can tell you about her. So by the time it was all over, theoretically, you would know Vicky and you would hopefully like her and want to take her out with you. So I put this build in front of testers, and the response was much more enthusiastic. This version of the game worked so much better. So we moved ahead with the final art. I knew at this point that the work was good and people liked it, and that confidence was all I needed to move in the right direction. All right, like I was able to make both my instincts and my experience happy here. And I brought up the words motivation and confidence a lot during this talk. That's often the case with me. The reason why it takes so long for me to make these games most of the time is that I'm always extraordinarily uncertain about what step to take next. I know my reputation and livelihood are both on the line, and it can be paralyzing if I let it. And like the Don Henley song says, the more I know, the less I understand. So I have to perform all these mental tricks to kind of sidestep and work around my own neuroses and achieve that sense of safety and comfort and security that enables me to move on to the next step of design. For me, getting there, it's getting my instincts and experience to agree with each other. And speaking of, Unavowed is available now, so you should all go buy it and see how well I did. So, whoops, thank you very much.
We'd have time for a few questions if anyone has any.
Yeah, like I said, I'm used to talks being a half hour, so I didn't quite gauge it right, but we got more time for Q&A.
Hi.
Hi, yes. The lights are right in my face, so it's hard to see.
Sure. So I loved Unavowed. It was one of my favorite games last year.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh, thank you. Wow, all right. Like, ask and you shall receive.
So I'm wondering, if Dragon Age was one of the inspirations, did you consider romance options, and why didn't it happen?
Someone didn't listen to the commentary. Yes, yes, I did. I'm trying not to spoil anything. Often when I was being interviewed about the game, like, yeah, BioWare's your inspiration. Are you going to add romances? And I said, I am going to try, and if they're awkward and they're uncomfortable or whatever, if I don't feel I quite got there, I'll just remove them. And obviously, you know what happened. I mean, the gist of it is that there's certain, depending on choices you make, depending on the origin stories that you choose at the beginning of the game, like you do something to one of the companion characters potentially that there's no matter what, they're not going to hook up with you. And keeping all of that stuff, keeping all those states was really difficult. And my brain was already breaking from all the multiple. I'm trying not to spoil anything, so I'm maybe not answering the question as well as I could. But keeping track of all those states, was already breaking my brain, and adding romance options on top of that would just have compounded the complexity even more. So I decided not to this time around. Maybe next time if I do this type of game again. Anybody else?
Hi, I was wondering, do you have any sort of, beyond the design stuff, is there any particular ways that you work or environments that you need to be in to help marry your instincts and your experience, or do you find that it can sometimes happens and it sometimes doesn't?
Hating myself, mostly. Long walks, just thinking a lot. There's no rhyme or reason. There's no special way. I just got to keep hammering away until it works. I mean, the advice I always give to folks when they're stuck is that it's still a job at the end of the day. You just gotta put in your 8 hours or however long, and even if nothing comes, you still want to be in that state where if something does come to you, you're at work and you can take advantage of it. You just have to trust that it comes. You just got to keep working at it. I found ways, just by quickly prototyping, getting it in front of testers, getting feedback. Often I will get, like I said, I knew that scene was bad. I knew it wasn't working. It wasn't that good. I put it in front of the testers anyway. And what I say is, yeah, I know this isn't good. Just give me your honest feedback. And often by hearing what doesn't work, sometimes helps me realize, oh, it doesn't work because of this, so maybe I'll try this instead. There's no rhyme or reason, but that's usually what works for me. Just getting people to play it is the best thing you can do. Get it working as well as you can, and get it in front of testers. Not every tester is able to kind of see past the rough edges and the placeholder art. But I've been doing it for a while, so I know the testers that can, so I'll ask them. I don't know if does that answer your question? Yay, okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, it was the question about the doorway, actually, with the...
Doorway?
Yeah, the police station.
Oh, yes, okay.
Yeah, no, I find doorways quite interesting, actually. Like, I think that they feature in narratives quite a lot. Like, if you think about, like, the film Labyrinth, it kind of, doorways always kind of, like, add a sense of mystery. Mm-hmm. And it always gives you, like, an opportunity to kind of put, like, a guardian of a doorway and kind of add, like, a mystery element to it. So I just wanted to ask, why do you kind of consider the doorway to be kind of like a bit of a design no-no?
Oh, it wasn't that. It wasn't that the doorway was a design no-no. It's just that I had it in my head. My experience taught me that everything needs to be very tight and very efficient. And so I didn't want you to have to always the exterior of the police station was the only purpose it served is to, you walk into that area and you have to walk through the entire background to get into the police station, just to talk to the captain. And I felt that was wasting the player's time. And so it wasn't that doors are bad or anything like that. I just wanted to keep things as tight and as efficient as possible. I wanted that room to have use and not just be a stopgap between one place and the other, because I wanted to keep things just very tight. So doors are fine. Nothing's wrong with doors. You all used one to get in here. So I don't know if does that answer your question? Okay, grand. Anybody else?
Hi. Have you or anyone else in the industry that you know, have they ever had an experience with a game that they wanted to continue developing, but then they had to stop because they were just really confused about where to go, even after asking for help and whatnot. But then they've come back to it, say a month or maybe more later, and then they've been able to fix it?
I've definitely had months like that, but the problem is once you get in the habit of stopping, it becomes a habit. It just becomes a crutch. Like, oh, I'm not feeling it, I'm just gonna not work, I'm just not gonna do it. And then you get into that habit, and then it just, that 1 month becomes 2 months or 3 months, and then years have gone by and you haven't made any progress. So, like I said, it's a job at the end of the day. If you treat it as a job, which it is if you wanna earn your living from it, then you just gotta keep plugging at it. And it's, like when you're inspired and you're on fire and everything's flowing and you're just running on instinct, it's fun, it's not work. But when that runs out, it's work, and work always sucks. So, but you still gotta do it. It's even if it still takes a month, you can't get out of the habit of working, I guess, if that makes any sense. Anybody else? Going once? Going twice?
Okay. Yeah. I think we're done.
Okay. I guess we're good to go.
Okay. Well, thanks once again, Dave.